Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we're going to really cool comparison between two great everyday watch options. Now, in terms of everyday watches, some key characteristics in design language. You're looking for something you can wear every day. Of course, you want to find that versatile blend of both sporty and dressy attributes. Today, we're going to be looking at the Erebus Ascent in the enamel white and also the Citizen Collection NB1050. And both of these watches are actually probably more similar than you might think, but they also do approach things very differently. Of course, the Erebus coming from a Microbrand, enthusiast driven and owned at that, whereas the Citizen is more of a mainstream benchmark in terms of value proposition. This particular episode has actually it's a sponsored one, so this is exciting, guys. This segment has been proudly brought to you guys by propercloth.com, a New York based brand that really impressed me recently. I just love this Japanese low twist plaid shirt. The weave is nice and soft to the touch while still feeling tough enough for everyday life. It pairs really perfectly with these Japanese 12-ounce dark indigo stretch jeans. Pants are where fit is even more important, and you can really dial in the custom configurations here for the perfect fit. And when investing in a fine pair of dark Japanese denim, you want to remove any guesswork. And when blue jeans may feel too casual, they have these awesome Italian charcoal stretch pants. A great 4-season setup that goes with anything and can easily be dressed up or dressed down. The whole process is just simple, easy, and fast, perfect for anyone struggling with off-the-rack fitment. These are made exactly to your size and fit preferences and guaranteed to fit perfectly. Then, with your feedback, they can dial in any adjustments you might need to, basically make it even better, right? For free in terms of alterations or even working in returns. Then you're pretty much golden. You save that custom fit into your profile and everything else is just easy street. It's just what they do and they're really good at it. From an execution standpoint to customer care, Proper Cloth has got it all figured out. So make sure to check them out down in the site links below, where you'll find a custom curated gallery where you can use discount code AVERAGEBROS for a 10% discount off of your first order. Thanks again, Proper Cloth. And now back to the segment. So Erebus, guys, a little about that brand. They were founded and are driven by Jody Musgrove of YouTube's Just One More Watch and his business partner and avid watch collector, Stephen Parker. The Ascent in this white enamel setup is going to go for $449 direct, whereas the Citizen is a JDM model, and it is actually available for about $388 currently from Sakura Watches. Of course, that's depending on the conversion rates. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, now at face value, these can be very similar, of course, with similar movements with the Erebus running on a Miyota 9015, whereas here you're going to have the Citizen Miyota 9011. So, of course, more of an in-house kind of application versus, hey, this is going to be third party. But with that, they're definitely working much harder because they understand what enthusiasts are looking for and they're targeting enthusiasts, versus this Citizen isn't necessarily targeting them, and this is going to be more of a general market release. And then even that, it's a limited market release because it is typically just, found in Japan. And this has definitely been a classic within the space. They haven't updated it much over the years. There are some other models that do have some really cool silver leaf dials, but they don't come on a bracelet. So I thought it would be more appropriate to compare on bracelet to on bracelet. Also, the Erebus has different bracelet options, but this is the one that I have on hand. These are both really great watches, guys. At the end of the day, you really can't go wrong with either, but I think, it would be fun to kind of compare these two. So let's start off with the Erebus, right? It's the newcomer in town, a newer brand, and yeah, they have their eye on this space. And of course, they've created and curated something that is quite handsome and versatile, right? It's not overdoing it, but it still wants to have all of those nice features that you'd like to see. 38.5 millimeters in diameter, 11 millimeters thick, and that's including the crystal, and about 44.5 millimeters lug to lug. Versus here on the Citizen, you're going to have 38 millimeters by 10.8 millimeters thick, and then about 46.5 lug to lug. So again, still a lot of similarities there, but one thing you might have noticed there is flat sapphire versus here, you're going to have a slight dome, and it works. And of course, here you're going to have a nice sapphire with an inner AR coating, whereas here you're going to have a nice sapphire with an inner AR coating as well, but this one's going to be flat versus slightly domed. Also, the colors here, this is going to be a pure white dial versus here, this is going to be more of an opaline white, pretty much a very, very pale silver that visually is going to render quite white. Also, you're going to see a 6 o'clock placement for the date versus a 3 o'clock placement for the date. Some people like things to be a little bit more traditional. Some things, people prefer it to be a little bit more symmetrical in terms of the general dial layout. One, of course, is going to be heavily favor the use of Lume, while the other is going to be less concerned because it's meant to be an everyday watch and not necessarily some super versatile dive watch or, something that you're going to be using to a tactical use case. Whereas here, you're getting a bit more of kind of that overbuilt feel. Now, these are both made out of stainless steel, but the Citizen is actually using a Duratect hard coating in terms of that surface treatment, which is going to prevent any types of minor scuffs and dings. Versus here, you're going to have an uncoated setup. But again, it's if we start getting into coated microbrands, I mean, they start to multiply up in terms of couples of hundreds of dollars more. So like if you were to compare this to something like a Troska commuter with a white enamel dial, you're going to be paying, close to double, maybe not quite double, but you're going to be paying a good amount more, essentially, for that, where this is definitely going to be more on the very, very approachable side at $449 at kind of its full price. You do have a case back that is solid here. And the movement inside is a 9015, which isn't too bad to look at, but I do like the deep stamp case back there. Versus here on this 9011 movement, you're actually going to get a display back, and you're going to see, let me just give it a quick little wipe here. You're going to see a really good, cool looking movement because they went through the trouble of actually giving you a custom rotor as well. So check that out. So very nice. It's going to be definitely hard to capture on the camera there, but you guys can see it's, it's very similar in terms of its look, just a different rotor, and of course going to be tuned to more in-house specs. And, typical with any movement manufacturer, they're going to save the good stuff for themselves and, in terms of their in-house regulating. And these are really nice. There's some other big differences are going to be when you get to the bracelet. Here you're going to have 20 millimeters in terms of that lug width versus here 19 millimeters, right? So an enthusiast watch brand, it's going to be tough for them to ever put out an odd number because they know what it's like to have to search for different types of straps that are going to fit. Versus here, Citizen was just thinking, hey, well, we want what's going to be ultimately the most proportionate, and we're not really concerned with you buying aftermarket straps and what you're going to pair with it. We want you to just get it nice out of the box. Another big difference is going to be, of course, the thought process around the clasp. Here's a major shortcoming of this watch. It has very long links, but there are no half links. And then when it comes to the clasp, it's very short. Although this is nicely milled and contoured, you only get this space for two manual micro adjustments. Now, I don't mind there being two manual micro adjustments if you have shorter links, because then you can dial in between essentially shorter than half of a link, right? So you have a quarter link, and then you have a half link, then you have a full link. Here, it's pretty much all full size links, and then you have something that would be like, an adjustment in between like a quarter. So it's a little bit harder to get that dialed in, and you're going to end up with it either being a little bit tighter than you like or a little bit looser. And that's, of course, depending on your wrist size. Like you might have a wrist where this just fits absolutely perfectly, which is great. But If you're more into the new camp of, well, it's nice to have a little bit of on-the-fly adjustment, something like this Erebus is definitely going to speak to you more, because now toolless, you can just press down and then you can pull that out for a little relief in the heat, and then you can put it back in, ratcheting to set it back. And then also when you're dialing it in, you can see that these are very short links, right, on this 5-link Jubilee style bracelet. The nice thing is with those shorter links, you can just make smaller incremental changes. You don't have to use the whole extension essentially to do that. You just have your choices in between, however much room you want to give yourself. I like to tighten it all the way down, size it, and then if I need to give it a slight relief, I do. And then that way I have more room to give myself a relief if my wrist is swelling. And this becomes more required. I mean, I would say it's not a requirement. I know a lot of people do believe that, but remember, this was very much popularized by the Rolex Glide Lock system. And the reason why that was so important is because their bracelets had so little play, because they're made very stiff. And I know a lot of people equate that to just quality, but it is also a design choice for many brands where they can leave things a little bit looser for comfort, and essentially you won't have to dial in your fit as much because of the way the articulation will lay and grip on your wrist, and versus something that's going to be very fixed and bracelet like, right? Like a bangle where everything is stiff. You have to get that fitment correct. So it's nice to have a certain level of really small micro adjustments to dial in the fitment that's most comfortable. Whereas here you have a little bit more of an old school effect here, where you don't necessarily need to have a lot of extra positions, because technically there's enough room to where you can wear it a little bit looser or a little bit tighter, and it's still going to feel quite comfortable. But with that said, let's actually get these pieces on the wrist and see how they wear. Okay guys, as you can see, the Citizen sits very nicely on my 7.5-inch wrist, and my wrist, although on the larger side, as you guys can see, it's quite round and tall, so it's not like it's just the wide, flat, super accommodating wrist. So I do have to be conscious of, different things in terms of ultimate dimensions as well as case proportions. Now on the other side, check it out. The Erebus also wears pretty much about exactly the same in terms of how it feels on your wrist. I will say it does feel maybe a little bit heftier, and that's probably just because of more material, the more solid clasp that's fully milled as well versus the semi-milled section of the Citizen here. Maybe I get them both on camera there. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get a fair amount of perspective distortion. It's just going to make the watch seem a lot larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low, and then just tighten up the frame here so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrists. And check that out. Very slim profile, great contouring there. The fitment on the end link is tight, but the flow on it isn't the greatest. And honestly, I'm not huge into one who's like the end link has to look like it's part of the case. Like, I actually think it looks good when brands can actually differentiate it. It's similar like when you put on like a NATO strap, right? Like it flows all the way through. It's not looking like it's integrated. So like not every end link has to be perfectly integrated, but for me, this one just doesn't fit or align in a way that is really exciting or adds anything to it. I think they could have just made it a little bit more inset and probably had it flow a little nicer than it is. And it's one of the main reasons I haven't put this bracelet on my NB1060s with the nicer dials. Now, looking at the Erebus, definitely going to be more of the feedback that you would get from today's watch enthusiast, right? You want that end link to flow and fit and look very nice and organic with the lines of the case. And look at that case. Look at the undercut there, the nice top bevel. It definitely has a bit of a taller feel to it, but you're also getting a lot more depth thanks to that outer sloped chapter ring there. And then of course you're getting a lot more surface area in terms of lume. You're getting way more complex hands that feel a bit more balanced in terms of, you're looking at the kind of line weights of everything. This definitely feels quite a bit more cohesive versus when you're looking at this, you might feel like the handset is a little thin compared to the wider blockier indices. Although the indices, I wouldn't call them, thick, compared to the hour and minute hand. They do seem maybe they're like a little thick, or they're making the handset look a little thin by comparison. So it's, those little things that maybe an entrepreneurial eye wouldn't catch, but from an enthusiast perspective and understanding how much folks can kind of nitpick every little detail, you can see here that that's something that you're not really going to be able to pick apart because it looks really great. And look at the way it hugs the wrist very nicely. Nice hugging of the wrist on here as well. A little bit less complex, but you're also getting, again, that nice hardened coating. Let's look at the sharpness in terms of the transition. I think on the top lug, you can see it's probably just a little bit sharper and then a little bit softer on the bottom side of that bevel. Whereas here, you're going to see probably maybe a little softer, but it's on a more organic, more curved a lug style, and then you just get that little sliver of brush that comes across. I personally probably would have preferred there to be a little bit more of a brushed side section just to really accentuate those bevels. But the nice thing about the undercut and that bevel are they're really melting the visual weight of this piece, because now it's reflecting off of your skin, it's reflecting off the environment, and it's just making the watch overall visually appear just a bit thinner. So I dig that. So with that said, let's actually get these off of the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, check it out. Nice blue Lume. Of course, one has just more applied. There's more surface area, so that Lume is going to be pumping even stronger. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see with these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And you can see that enamel white is going to render as pure white. No warmth or anything like that. In terms of the glow, it's just going to be taking that and reflecting white right back at you. Whereas this kind of opaline pale silver dial is going to have a little bit more dynamic shifts to it. You can see there, it's going to look more of kind of gray versus just a white with a shadow on it. And a lot of that has to do with the micro texturing. There's a very, very faint level of sun ray that is going to be there as well. So you do get that additional texture. You can also notice the light in the way that it's playing off of the micro finishing on those indices on the Citizen. So yeah, you are missing out on extra Lume because you're just getting kind of those outer plops, but you are going to get that little extra level of light play versus here. Of course, you're going to have to be looking a little bit deeper on the Erebus, because you're going to have to kind of pay attention to the facets and the little micro beveling, which are great. And I mean, you can really see it more abundant on the handset in terms of the shapes and how everything is really playing really beautifully. And, these bracelets are finished really quite well. Of course, again, the integration is a little bit nicer. And of course, the fitment can be nicer on the Erebus, but that is to be expected, because at the end of the day, the Citizen isn't necessarily targeting enthusiasts. Of course, they're an enthusiast brand that enthusiasts appreciate, but not every model is targeted at the enthusiast. And that's something that I think we as enthusiasts need to kind of learn and understand a little bit more, because it feels like we take things very, very personally when a brand does something that doesn't align with our particular wants or needs. And at the end of the day, not everything is, again, targeted towards us and our collecting. So with that said, guys, another huge shout out to propercloth.com, for sponsoring this segment, giving me a little extra time, as an independent channel, guys. I pretty much have to keep my cycle coming in and out in terms of doing reviews and everything. So it is nice to get a sponsored segment to come along and really give me a little bit of room to have some fun, compare some stuff that I might not necessarily have time for, and I can make time for it thanks to the contributions from sponsors like Proper Cloth. So definitely do check them out, guys. But in terms of these two watches, I really enjoy them both. I own them both. I wear them both. And yeah, it's just one of those things where I think they do compare really well. And they differ in certain ways. Of course, if you are at an enthusiast event, the Erebus is probably going to be more interesting because everybody knows just one more watch, and you can kind of talk about that, and it's fun, and from that standpoint. But I think in a more regular setting, maybe the Citizen ends up being a little bit more interesting because you don't have to explain too much about it. It ultimately kind of speaks for itself. This is a nicer watch from a brand that most people recognize as, pretty nice. No, it's not anything luxury or anything like that, but you can still kind of have your cake and eat it too, in terms of an enthusiast will be able to appreciate that this is this kind of rare JDM model, right? But the normal person will appreciate that it's a Citizen, right? And it's a known brand, a known commodity that make good products. Whereas the Erebus, somebody who doesn't know what that is, they're not really into watch collecting, they're not going to necessarily get it, and there's going to be no real way to explain it either. And then you look at both brands, they have this, very similar movements from Miyota. And then, you think about Citizen, they're this huge company that's founded back in 1918 by Japanese and Swiss investors, which I think people kind of forget. A lot of times we just think about this Japanese brand. Yeah, it's founded by Japanese and Swiss investors. And the Citizen Group does own Miyota, Belova, Arnold & Son, Frederic Constant, Alpina, Campagnola. So, even newer brands like Le Jeu Perret, right? Like they all fall within that big Citizen umbrella. Whereas here we have this small, independent kind of slice of life brand in Erebus that is much more of a passion project, that has products that are definitely more niche ultimately, but they're also going to resonate more ultimately because they're meant to evoke the emotion and everything like that. There's not really any other purpose for them to exist besides, for enjoyment and for an enthusiast or a collector versus, there's a certain level of necessity that is coming into play when a big brand is putting out what it does best and, it's moving pieces at volume. Although this is, again, a little bit more of a niche setup with it being, not something that's internationally available very easily. So I think you can kind of go either way here. They're both a lot of fun. I think in terms of which one is executed better, I think the Erebus definitely makes a case in terms of it being more challenging, more complex, and ultimately, executes its theme more proficiently. Whereas the Citizen, you got to give it points though, because it's a Citizen watch with a Citizen movement, with a Citizen design language. Although it's somewhat generic, I will say that it's not looking like it's, you can't pick apart the Citizen and say, oh, well, it has a Jubilee bracelet like this, or it has a case chamfer like that. Like, oh, it's Seiko-esque and, these types of things. So I think that's cool. And then also Erebus, screw down crown. I mean, even though both of these have 100 meters of water resistance, one has a push-pull crown in the Citizen, and they're fine with that because, it's meant to be a dressy watch. They're not trying to impress somebody that's going to go diving with this. But Erebus, of course, with its ownership being driven by enthusiasts, a screw-down crown's great because now you're getting that extra level of versatility, and you're getting that kind of go anywhere, do anything, kind of in play as well. So, I've talked way too much on this, guys, so I'll let you talk about it down in the comments below. Which do you prefer? Why? What do you think about this space? What do you hope to see from Erebus in the future? What things from Citizen are you also hoping to change and see in the future as well? Or what other references within this family line are you curious to check out? So with that said, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you're ready, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.